The trade talk is here. Look, the Raptors and Pacers have been involved, linked, if you will, in various conversations over the last couple of months.
They
Just
have
in
been.
general, have they been though? Well, yeah, that's another thing. You have fans being like questioning. No, they haven't been in conversation. Anyways, in general, do you think the Pacers will be buyers this summer or this season, or do you think they're going to wait until the summer to kind of see where they're at?
This isn't a front office, like, despite the fact that they did veer toward a rebuild and got Tyrese Haliburton at the time that they did, they don't make a lot of in-season trades. And they've talked
Right.
about that in the past, that a lot of times when they sign a player or they bring a player in over a trade, they don't do that with looking at that player as an asset. They very much like to look at players as people and giving them that
Mm-hmm.
full year to be in that new market. This is something that they've discussed. So it would be somewhat out of character for them to make a big shakeup in the season, but it's also their jobs. Like, it's also their jobs to be evaluating where the weaknesses are. And like I said, I'm not somebody who really dips their toes into the transaction market a lot.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can see my tweets, I'm on record. 10 games into the year, I was pretty convinced that this defense was not going to be better with what the construction of the roster currently is. And I
Fair.
think that my opinion on that might have been like, hey, that's okay. Like, this season wasn't necessarily supposed to be about them making the playoffs. I mean, even going into it, if you listen to a lot of what happened and came out of media day, like, Tyrese certainly wants to win. Like, when he came back from Team USA, he was asked, "What's your biggest takeaway from not meddling and what happened there?" And he was like, "I'm tired of losing." And that's why
Right.
the
Yeah.
in-season tournament, I think, mattered to him about as much as it did. So,
Mhm.
like, he wants to win, and obviously the coaching staff is trying to put the team in the best position to win, but the front office at the same time was kind of like, hey, we're trying to take steps forward, but we also still realize that this is about development. Well, I think that the calculus changed when Tyrese comes out and is playing like an MVP candidate. If he's a top 10 player, I think that you start to be more aggressive, and this offense allows you to be more aggressive too. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's going to stay at this exact historic pace the entire season. I'm sure that teams will continue to come with ways to mitigate some of it and to find ongoing counters the more scouting that they have on it. But I don't want to say that you would be wasting a season, but if there's a player out there that you think that fits this timeline and could help you on that end of the floor who might be available, I think you would be remiss if you weren't trying to make overtures there.
Right. And
Especially if you
also,
have any knowledge at all that that player might be willing to re-sign with you, then yeah, just gonna
exactly.
put that
And
out there.
if you in the OG Anunoby situation, if you can get the bird rights for that type of player and potentially, be able to sign them over whatever the cap is that you can get. So I think that's an important part of it. Obviously, Pascal Siakam extension eligible. That's also another wrinkle in this. It's like, will they be willing to re-sign? But I guess just in terms of what the Pacers need right now and what they're looking for between those two players, who do you think you would prefer skill set wise? Because of what the Pacers, we've talked about it over the last 40 minutes, what they need.
They both address different needs. I mean, I think I have
Yeah.
I have more question marks with regards to Pascal. I mean, people in the Toronto media sphere know that I adore his game. I
Mm-hmm.
compare him a lot to being able to slide a piece of paper through a crack in the door, and that's a lot of the times the amount of space that he has to operate in and the offense that he plays in. And that is not what it would be like here. Like, just knowing what his numbers are out of empty side pick and rolls when a guard screens for him, like, imagine Buddy Hield doing that for him. Imagine
Mm-hmm.
Tyrese Haliburton potentially doing that for him, and the amount of pressure that could take off and what he's seeing against traps, having another secondary creator. That being said, I also watched what it looked like for him the first 7 games of this season and what it looked for him when it was like, hey, let's try to be a little bit more intentional and get him some post touches. Lauren will know Rick Carlisle probably ain't going to run a post-centric offense. This will never be a post-centric offense.
Right.
And I know
Yeah.
that from personal experience because Domantas Sabonis' role was pretty whack for about 2.5 months until they got to the point where it's like, hey, you know what? This egalitarian offense and like putting him in the corner doesn't really make sense for anyone, not for him and not for anybody else. And like, I get where they got to that point because they didn't have any movement shooting. Like, watching the difference between him with the Pacers and him with the Kings is like watching a fountain with a burned out pump. Like, when you got to Sacramento, I was like, the water's turned on.
Yeah.
This is what this looks like. But like,
Right.
they weren't super amenable to putting him in the post. Like, not that you have to play Pascal at a triangle concepts, but Sabonis very much wanted to play at a triangle concepts. The coaching staff very much did not. So I have some wonderings in my head of, what would that look like with Pascal on this roster, even though that I think that the spacing and the players that are on this roster would be very complementary to him, depending upon who would be going in and out. OG is much easier to plug into that space, and I think that if OG were on this roster, he would be getting a few more of the types of on-ball creation reps that he doesn't regularly get because Scotty and Pascal are naturally in front of him in the pecking order for very obvious reasons, in addition to Dennis Schroeder getting as much of the ball as he gets. So, and then just defensively, OG hasn't been very good defensively lately. I haven't seen a ton of games, but like the few times that I've turned it on, like he has had some drop off. But I think that there's a soul tax that comes for playing on a type of team that they're on right now, when people are on expiring contracts, and when you start to sense that something's stale and there's an uncertainty. So I think that that might be part of that. But just having somebody that that, like, for instance, like what I brought up with Miles earlier, I think if the coaching staff had their way, they would like to get him out of pick and rolls more often and be using him as a weak side corner dude. They did that a lot with Aaron Nesmith last year, where they would put him on 5 so that they could switch ball screens. They don't have a feasible way to be doing that. You can't do that with Obi Toppin. Obi does not have the hip flexibility to be somebody who's going to guard a 5 and switch out to a 1. That's why Buddy Hield's guarding some of these better matchups. So being able to do that with OG on Anunoby, and just, I think at his best, he's probably the most positionalist defender in the NBA. So is it going to fix and remedy everything and they're going to be an elite defense simply because they got him? No, but they have to take a step somewhere, and it would shift some other people into more natural roles that I think would make the defense more functional. So, and timeline wise, it just makes more sense.
Yeah, and he's Indiana, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the Pascal thing is so fascinating to me, because coming into this conversation, I was like, to me, in my mind, on paper, and obviously if it were going to happen, some people would say if it were going to happen, it would have happened already. I don't necessarily agree with that. But I think what's so interesting about the Pacers with Pascal is as far as the development and on the Pacers side of things, and not, this not wanting to rush the timeline situation. It's so hard when you have Tyrese popping the way he is, and then you have the $19 million expiring contract in Buddy Hield. So that's why I keep going back and forth of, on top of everything that they have going in their favor to being reasons why they should make a trade and push in the chips. At the same time, I look at the Pacers roster and I'm like, okay, with what young players would they truly be prepared or like ready to part with right now? And that's where I kind of come to this point where I'm like, are they willing to push all those chips in? If like you just mentioned, this offensive schematic maybe issues that Pascal could potentially present, do you think that with how much maybe they like their young guys, or maybe they don't like some of them, do you think that that's something that they would be prepared to do with Pascal specifically now? Or do you think that, it would probably only be OG?
From what I know and understand, they were very serious about the calls that they made to Toronto about Pascal. I think the reservations there were what Pascal was putting out there about not wanting to re-sign anywhere but Toronto.
Yeah.
So there was
maybe that's changed though, Caitlin. Maybe, he found a really nice restaurant in Indiana. Maybe there, he likes Tyrese Haliburton. Who knows? Maybe
he watched Tyrese in the in-season tournament and was like, wow, that's what spacing looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
It's entirely possible. So, I do know that was a legitimate thing when it got reported at the time. And on the Buddy front, I think that some of that probably got a little bit misconstrued, because when the reporting came out, it read very much like Buddy had requested a trade. I do not think that Buddy requested a trade. I think that they were far apart in contract extension negotiations. I think they're to a place now where Tyrese and Buddy are very close. Buddy, I had made a joke. I did a preseason pod with Tony East at Locked On Pacers, and he was like, how far into the season do you think we'll be before there's, a podcast about should Buddy be starting? And I go, I give it to Black Friday at the latest. Buddy was in the starting lineup 2 days before Black Friday. Yeah. So, like, their chemistry together and like, they continue, like, people always point out, like, Buddy's defense or this or that, or like this relationship isn't working. Like, they outscore opponents by 5 points per 100 when the two of them are out there. So I think that it's an embarrassment of riches as far as spacing when you have both of them. So I think I'm to the point where, unless they're going to be buyers and really be able to get somebody that they think is going to make them better, I would be surprised if he gets moved. Even though the fact that he's on an expiring deal, because if I were them, this is just me speaking from my perspective, I would let it ride. I would get to the summer, see if he can find the amount of money that he thinks that he wants. And if he doesn't, I think that he likes playing with Rick. I think he likes playing with Tyrese. I think he likes the freedom that he has in the scheme. And I don't think that there's any like severed relationship there by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't think it's completely implausible that he would still be on the team next year.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to check out the entire Objective Basketball podcast, the link is in the description. We will see you there.